Okay, so today what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go through some tactics and gear from both sides, so we get an idea of what everybody's working with. So to start, we'll start with the U.S. side. I have this up here because it always something I always wanted to remember and questions I always had when I was listening to people talk about the military. Essentially, what it does is it shows you the progression from squad being 7 to 14 soldiers all the way up army. Squad is 20 so when you're listening, so as far as gear, the average soldier it all really mission. They always had a saying, "Ammo before food," and you can see there on the right the amount of gear that would be carried. Yeah, that's a standard kit. But as I mentioned before, it's all about the mission. There are some called LRPs, long range patrols. If you were going on one of those, you might bring a lot more ammo than you would food. There's some guys that we're going to hear podcasts from who are doing secret ops missions in Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam. Some of them would carry very little food and would be forced, to find food while they were out in the jungle. So it really depends on what the mission was and who you were. You could carry some personal belongings if you wanted, books or things like that, but you try to be as light as possible. So the American military uniform, you have the boonie jungle hat. This was more for the special ops guys. They would it allows them to be lighter compared to what the standard helmet or the tin pot they would call them. That was used in World War II and still in Vietnam, which were heavy. The boonie hat was a little lighter and allowed them to move quicker. You had the mosquito nets, but that was mainly the special ops guys. As far as food, they're called sea rations, but this would be your standard kit. You'd see it comes with salt, sugar, a pack of cigarettes, matches, a spoon, and then in the center there's a can. And the cans would be all different kinds of meals, and then you got a little can opener called a P37 or a John Wade, which would open up your cans. They called it a P37 because it took 37 clicks to around the outside of the can before it was open. Um, the boot, the upper part of the boot, it says was made of cotton, while the bottom was made of leather. There's holes in the bottom that the water drains out of. It took a while for us to get to this. Originally, we went into Vietnam with the old school leather boots, and we realized in the jungle it just wasn't going to work. They became too heavy. They rotted away. Um, and then, with the booby traps, they ended up adding metal plates to the bottom. And so they improved the boots over the course of the war, but still not the best thing when you're trucking around a jungle. The flak jacket, this weighed approximately 9 pounds. It had it had some protection in the front, but the sides are open. One of the veterans, Travis, who I'm hopefully going to reach out to and have him talk to you, he still has his flak jacket from Vietnam, and he actually was wounded pretty early on in his tour when a mortar went off and shrapnel hit him in the side. So the front and back had some protection, but the sides were pretty much open. You can kind of like think of a life jacket, how it covers the front, but the sides are exposed. Dog tags. This is just how we identify. You have two of them. One goes with the commander, one stays with the body. That way they know what's going on. But you can see in the bottom left here, and some of you might have this on, like if you have a dog. They started putting rubber on the around the metal because when you're walking through the jungle, it would actually make noise, and the enemy could hear it. Now I talked to one guy just to give you an idea. He talked about how the enemy um, they were so good at tracking, like they could smell Americans just because of how often they showered, the soap, the toothpaste, and they were able to pick up on that scent. So you can imagine, the sound of metal clinging in the jungle would be a dead giveaway. So here's the helmet I was talking about before. It's the one size fits all. It's about 3 pounds. Doesn't sound heavy, but when you put that on your head and you're running around and you got to make sure it stays on, it can be quite cumbersome. And yeah, this was for all ground troops. They would wear this. It's going to protect you from shrapnel, stray bullet, but in most cases, a direct shot to the helmet's going to go right through. So there's your standard uniform. You have the green pants, the jacket, the boots, and all of this could be worn. As the war progressed, some guys would forego the jacket. We're talking about Vietnam temperatures that consistently feel like 115, 120 degrees plus. So when you have a heavy jacket, heavy pants, a 9 pound flak jacket, a 3 pound heavy helmet, 90 pounds worth of gear, heavy boots. This is all going to weigh you down. And you have guys who just die from heat exhaustion, dehydration, just from being too much. So other standard issue things, you have your canteen, your ammo pouches, the M6, the M14 or the M16. The M14 is shown there below. As the war progresses, we go to the M16, which I'll talk about in a second. Ponchos were key. It rains a lot in Vietnam. During the rainy season, you want that to stay dry. You could attach them together and make a shelter. But it's not going to keep you totally dry, but it's going to do better than if you didn't have one. And so, it sounds kind of morbid, but then you can use them to cover dead bodies. But you're always looking to get a clean, dry poncho. So the helicopter, the UH-1 Huey, this is one of the most important vehicles and pieces of technology that we have during the war. It serves so many different roles. You have troop transport. It'll turn into a medical helicopter. You can put 50 caliber guns on the outside of it, turn it into a gunship. You can put rockets on the outside of it. People, veterans of Vietnam, love the helicopters. They love the sound of it, and it was impossible to go anywhere in Vietnam and not hear the helicopter. It was known as our helicopter war because it was really the first war where we used helicopters a lot. But when we talk about the first battle of the Ai Drang Valley, you'll see it was still testing what they were capable of. And really what it showed and gave us was that wherever the enemy is, we could drop soldiers right then and there at that moment, and then pick them up at the same time. So the Hueys were super important to our war. So this is the M14. This is the early stages. This was it, it was a good gun. It was more reliable than the M16, but you could see some of the specs there. Where it had a 20 round magazine. It weighed about 10 pounds when it was loaded, which again you add that to everything. It could be pretty heavy. Maximum rate of fire 750 rounds per minute, and had a range of about 5 football fields. The M16 was a much smoother weapon. It was argued to be the best weapon ever created in a clean standard um, firing range. The problem was is that a Vietnam jungle is not clean. So a little bit of moisture, a little bit of dirt, things like that get into it, and it could jam. When you're in a battlefield, you don't want your weapon to jam. So you have some older guys that will elect to continue to use the M14. I mentioned before about guys doing those covert ops missions into Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam. They almost never carry the M16. You would have a squad of like 7 guys taking on 200 to 300 Vietnamese at a time, and so having an M16 that jams is not what they needed. So a lot of them rolled with the M14. This is a grenade launcher kind of N79 blooper. It gets its name because when the grenade comes out of the barrel, it makes a blooping sound. But they're pretty accurate. Ben carried one of these, Ben Diggs. So hopefully I could get him in here to talk to you about it. But it talks about he could be accurate. Guy running away and he could just drop it right on his head. So they were more accurate than mortars, and they gave a good advantage to our soldiers. The M60, that was our machine gun. You can see there it's on a bipod in the front. It weighed 28 pounds when it was loaded and 23 pounds when it was unloaded. Typically, the biggest person in the group would get it. So Let's say you were the biggest person in your squad and you're carrying the M16 for a couple months, and then you get a replacement guy who's bigger than you. Well, guess what? You're the veteran, so you're going to give your M60 to that guy, and that guy is now going to be the M60 machine gunner. It laid heavy suppressing fire, but they say when you talk about machine guns, is when you carry one and you're shooting one, the enemy is usually trying to draw their attention to you because they can't move if the machine gun's firing. So um, fires a lot of weapon, a lot of rounds quickly, but you're going to draw a lot of enemy fire towards you. The ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, that's South Vietnam's army. They are the ally of the United States. So we originally went over there to train them how to fight the North Vietnamese, and then we get dragged into the war. They were our allies. They helped us. And then when we leave in 1973, we supply them to continue the fight, which they'll put on for another 2 years. All right. So VC and NVA tactics. So the first thing is their Ho Chi Minh Trail. I mean, you can see the trail there. It wasn't just a trail. There was boat paths, bike paths. There was full-fledged roads. A lot of it was built by civilians. I was reading one where they built a 2,000-mile pipeline with gas through the jungle where they could refuel trucks. They had tunnels, almost like the Holland or the Lincoln Tunnel, where you could fit a tank that would go under rivers, so it could disappear under the rivers. And then you also have just the jungle. Uh, One of the guys that he actually was running reconnaissance on the Ho Chi Minh Trail talked about they found a spot where they could put two tanks next to each other, the Vietnamese, and they could be simultaneously driving next to each other down the road. But when you looked up, the jungle was so thick you couldn't see it from the sky. So that would be essentially like covering Route One with jungle trees and not being able to see it from the sky. So it makes it harder for us to stop the trail. Um, and that's a main problem because if you can't stop the supply of men and material, then you have really a hard time winning the war. So you can see it says an estimated 20,000 soldiers a month came through the trail, and 20 to 30 tons of supplies a day. And we knew about it. We tried to stop it. We couldn't officially go in there because Laos, Cambodia are neutral, and we didn't want any other problems expanding the war. But we ran covert ops missions in there pretty much the entire time, trying to disrupt the supply. But again, it's a path, right? So if we destroy something, they just go around it or they fix it. Um, the second bullet there is the interesting one. We dropped 2.4 million tons of bombs on the trail, which is twice as many as we dropped on Germany in World War II. And we used Agent Orange, which is a chemical that kills all foliage to try to find the trail. But because we were unable to completely halt the supply of men and material, we were really ineffective um, in stopping the use of the trail. So you can see here, these guys are using bikes with a whole bunch of gear on it. I mean, they had people that was their jobs to run the trail. You can see here a ladder made of wood and bamboo. So even if you destroy that, a bomb gets lucky and hits that, it's going to take a couple days and it's going to be rebuilt, and they're just going to keep going. Elephants, and you would say like you should be able to see that from the sky. When they call Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia a triple canopy jungle, where your visibility could be cut down to like 3 feet, right? And where you can't see the sky at all. So it's real easy to conceal your movement in the jungle. See here, they're building a road. They got legit equipment there, and if the air raid sirens go on, American planes are coming. Everybody will scurry and hide. Bombs will drop, and then once the planes are gone, they'll come. They'll remove the bombs and continue about their job. Building a bridge along the trail. I see here more people loading bikes. So that's the trail. So the soldiers, uniformed soldiers for the North Vietnamese or the NVA or the PAVN, the People's Army of Vietnam or North Vietnamese Army, they're the regulars. They would be drafted just like Americans. They were getting training. And so they were doing a lot of their fighting in the northern part of South Vietnam. As the war progresses, they'll infiltrate further and further south. And then you have the Viet Cong. And so they were also known as Charlie, Chuck, VC, Victor Charlie, or just Black Pajamas because of the clothes they wore. Essentially, they were farmers during the day. They were civilians. And then they would fight at night. They would set up booby traps, mines in the road. They would, give the NVA our information. And for some of them, it was just they were kind of stuck in a tough spot. We come in, we ask them for our help. They say they're going to help us, and maybe they want to. Then we leave their village, and then the North Vietnamese come in and say, "If you help the Americans, we're going to kill you." Right? And so we're not going to kill them if they don't help us, but the North Vietnamese are. So that kind of forces their hand to then help the North Vietnamese, whether it's store weapons or hide soldiers, whatever it may be. Excuse me. And so they get dragged into the war. Now, that's not to say they wouldn't want to be in the war. They've lived in these villages for years, thousands of years. These villages have been around, and we could come in and just destroy it, as quickly as it was there, and then all of a sudden their livelihood is gone. So could lead to a lot of problems. So the main difference between the VC and the NVA, the VC, you kind of view them as like the terrorist. Because they wore civilian clothes, they could go wherever they want. They would plant car bombs in cities. Um, they would work on our bases. Again, Ben Diggs, he talks about, he has actually a picture of a woman. She was a barber. She cut his hair all the time. She would shave his neck with a straight razor blade. And then one night the base gets attacked and they find her dead outside with a gun in her hand. Right. So every day she's going onto the base to work. And then, she's noting down where the troops are going, how many. And then at night she's attacking them. So, and there wasn't really much you could do about that. And they were led by Tran Do. The big thing is people say that they were kind of disorganized, and they weren't. They had a hierarchy, and they had somebody supplying them and telling them what to do and things like that. And then you had Giap. He was the MVA leader of the regular army, and so he would use guerrilla tactics with the MVA. But a lot of the main battles that they would fight against us would be on the Cambodian or Laotian border. And so what they would do is they would try to kill as many of us as they could, and then they would run into a neutral country. Now they know we can't chase them, so then they stay there. They wait for more soldiers to come down the trail. They resupply, and then they come back into the country and engage us again, and then run away. And it just keeps going on and on and on. And it says it was better trained, and they avoid big open battles. They were trying to do hit and run tactics and just pester us. And their main weapon of choice was the AK-47. Not as efficient as a weapon as the M16. It wasn't as good as on the rifle range, but in the jungle it was better. You could take it, run it over with a tank, pick it up, and it's still going to shoot. There were often times where Americans would find an AK after their M16 had jammed, and they would use that in the battle. And other weapons were really just their traps, right? So you have punji sticks on the left that would be sharpened bamboo sticks that they would often either poop on or rub in like some animal feces or something, so that way you would cause infection. They had the bear trap there in the center. You step on it, it's going to clamp your leg, or like the big punji sticks that you see there on the right. As the war goes on, the punji pits are going to get smaller, and they're just going to be boot size. And so that way, one person steps, goes through their boot, that person's going to scream, and then the enemy knows where you're coming from. And you can see here, then they have these kind of mines. Today we will call them IEDs, improvised explosive devices, and you could put them anywhere. And as soon as you step on it, it's going to explode. So they put it behind doors, at the base of walls, in rubble. They would put it in, if they knew we were coming and they had a base camp set up, they might put one of those like in the important documents. So as we're going through the important documents, it explodes. They might put it in the rice because we would destroy the rice because they don't want, so they can't eat it. They put it in the rice bag and then that explodes. So you have to be cautious of everything. There's your IEDs, wire traps, bouncing Bettys, the anti-aircraft they were getting from China and the Soviets, and they were shooting down American airplanes. And it says over 1,700 aircraft were shot down in the 10-year span using those weapons. Then one of the biggest advantages they had was the tunnels. You can't talk about Vietnam without the tunnels. And you can see the guy on the left there; he's going into a little one, but they would have whole communities underground. There was one tunnel, the Chu Lai tunnels, I believe it was, that if you stretched the tunnels out in a straight line, they stretched over 200 miles. And it was actually under our base. And so they would pop up, shoot at us at night, and then dive back down, and we had no idea where it was coming from. But you can see on the picture on the right, excuse me, they have living quarters. There's a guy on the bottom. They had electricity in there, and they would be powered by a bicycle. They had ammunition supplies. They would dig deep enough to get water. There was one that had an amphitheater in it where they would bring in celebrities to perform shows and sing songs to keep the morale up. Hospitals, schools, whatever you could think of, they would put underground. And so you can see the guy on the right there is in a tunnel Vietnamese are smaller than Americans by nature, so they can move around pretty quickly. But then the guy on the left, like that's what he popped out of, right? So as soon as he pops back down and puts that cover on top of the hole, you're never going to know where it came from. And so they use these all over the place. So there's another image of it where we're on the top trying to figure out where they are, and they're just hanging out below us. So it kind of gives you a brief idea about the weapons and tactics that were used by both sides.